If you're looking for Wonderkids in Football Manager, you look in places like Argentina, Brazil, or Serbia, rather than somewhere like Andorra. This is because Football Manager tries to replicate real-life football with something called the youth rating. Each country has a score out of 200 as to how likely they are to produce the next Lionel Messi. So today I want to flip those scores around, making Argentina one of the lowest rated countries and Andorra one of the highest. Then I'm going to simulate the game into the future and see if the world football order changes completely. Theoretically, we now should see places like Andorra developing the very best players and countries like France developing nothing. But is the youth rating actually that important? Today we're going to answer that question and work out if there are other factors at play that have a way bigger role in developing players. We're jumping straight to 10 years in the future to see the short-term impacts. And sorting every player in the database by their potential ability, there are 6 regens in the best 10 players. Every player has a current ability and potential ability out of 200. Current ability obviously showing how good they are right now, and potential ability showing how good they could be. So for example, our Bolivian player Israel is at 12, but he has only got 148 current ability. His potential though was 191. But at 25 years old, he's not going to reach that now. In a normal Football Manager game, it is very unlikely you'd see this high potential ability from players from Bolivia, South Africa, and Iceland. Importantly, none of these players are coming from Brazil or Argentina or France or Germany. So the initial sign is, actually the youth rating is having an effect. If we put a filter on for just players from Andorra, you can see the highest potential ability player is 146. And this guy is actually a real player, he's not one of the generated players from the 10 years of simulation. The best generated player's potential is only 142. And given Andorra has got the best youth rating in the world, this is a little bit concerning. I've loaded up a bunch of leagues so we can see the impact of a maxed out youth rating in places like Andorra and Cambodia versus the lowest ratings in Brazil and France, and a few countries in between. In Brazil's top 10 players sorted by potential ability, 7 of them are real, and only 3 of them are generated players. So this is good, it does suggest that the number of really talented players coming through Brazil is going down. However, they all have incredible potential abilities of 180, 179, and 176. If they reach those potentials, it means they are some of the most elite footballers in the world. And notably, those potentials are way higher than any player that's come from Andorra. So what is going on here? Well, Palmeiras in Brazil have almost perfect academy coaching, youth recruitment, and youth facilities. The academy coaching is basically how good your coaches are at an under 11, under 12, so on and so forth level. The youth facilities are where these young players are training. So the better those scores are, the more likely they are to produce players with higher potential abilities on your youth intake day. And at Santa Coloma in Andorra, it's basically the opposite. So early indications show that maybe a club's facilities is way more important than the youth rating. This can be backed up when looking at the highest rated players from Cambodia, with their best player having a potential ability of 149. Compare this to France, and the best generated players have a potential ability of 179. But maybe we just haven't given this enough time yet. So we're going to jump to season 25, where things are a little different. The player with the highest potential ability is from Bolivia. But we still have players from Brazil, Croatia, and Argentina right up there, even though we demolished their youth ratings. However, there does seem to be a bigger spread of countries. Mali, Bosnia, Uzbekistan, Thailand, and Syria all have the odd generated player with insane potential ability. Filtering for just Andorran players, there is one guy who could have been a world beater, but at 27, it doesn't seem like he's come close to fulfilling his potential ability of 173. The issue seems to be he wasn't exposed to enough game time at a high enough level at an early age to reach that potential. Only really getting first team football in Ligue 1 at the age of 25. Now we saw before the best potential ability belongs to Mario Salinas from Bolivia. He got a lot of game time in Bolivia early in his career and has quickly become a starter at Benfica, so it's likely he will reach his full potential. I increased Bolivia's youth rating to 160, and as a result, they have 5 players with over 150 potential ability. If you want to win the Premier League in Football Manager, for the most part you need most of your squad to be over 150 current ability. So really, although they are producing better players than you would ordinarily see, it's still not a high enough volume. But again, although this country's youth rating is very high, they are still producing better players than Andorra, which has a much higher youth rating again. The difference here, again, is that Bolivian clubs do have better facilities in general than Andorran clubs. However, there is another factor at play, and that is reputation. The current champions of Bolivia have a reputation of 2.5 stars. The best club in Andorra only has a reputation of 2 stars. In simple terms, reputation is how big a club is. Obviously, a very good young player will want to sign for the best club possible, so clubs with high reputations have a better chance of poaching the best young players from smaller clubs like the ones in Andorra. Palmeiras in Brazil, for example, have 4.5 stars of reputation. And despite the low youth rating, Brazil are still producing a lot of world-class potential ability players. So it's looking like a mixture of facilities and reputation is actually more important than the youth rating. Ivory Coast basically sit in the middle of the road. Their youth rating was increased slightly to 120, and interestingly, they have loads more players than both Andorra and Bolivia with over 150 potential ability. The best club in Ivory Coast are ASEC Mimosas, which is a superb name, and they have incredibly good facilities around youth players. They also have a higher reputation than all the clubs in Andorra and Bolivia. So again, the trend is looking like facilities and reputation are very important here. I'm also wearing the shirt of Zoman FC from Ivory Coast. They don't have particularly good facilities, and they've only got 1 star of reputation, and as a result, they aren't generating many players with a high potential ability. Although this is where we can actually help, because you can buy a Zoman FC shirt from Sangalo, who partner with lesser known clubs from around the globe to sell their jerseys worldwide. So every time you buy a shirt from Sangalo, you're helping these clubs create an extra revenue stream, which may go towards improving their youth facilities. This is actually Zoman's first season in Ivory Coast's top division, and they're in a title fight ahead of the 29-time league champions ASEC Mimosas. If they finish in the top 2, they qualify for continental football. So if you want to get a Zoman shirt before they do that and you're accused of being a Glory supporter, I'd recommend you go and check out Sangalo's website, linked in the description, to check out all the clubs they're currently working with. But comparing the Ivory Coast players to those of France, you can see France are developing way better players again. Even looking at a club like St Etienne, they have near perfect facilities and 5 stars of reputation. Someone should do a long-term save with them. It would do pretty well on someone's second YouTube channel. France have actually increased their youth rating from 10 to 16, but again, compared to the 120 of Ivory Coast, the 180 of Bolivia, the 200 of Andorra, they should not be developing this many great players based on youth rating alone. But again, 25 years is still a pretty short time frame. But in season 50, the top players rated by potential ability are dominated by the usual suspects like France, Belgium, and Spain. However, we are seeing more high potential players from Andorra, but the ones in their late 20s look to have never reached their potentials. Again, this is because they're spending too long in Andorra, where the competitive level isn't high enough for them to improve, and then too long in the second teams of wherever they get sold to. It's a similar story with Cambodia's players, but there is a general upward trend in players' potential abilities. It's just happening way slower than you would assume it would when you change the youth ratings at the start of the game. Despite Brazil still producing some insanely good players in terms of potential ability, there is actually a slow downward trend in the number of really high potential ability players. But again, this is happening way slower than you would expect it to by changing the youth ratings 50 years ago. And so far, we aren't really seeing any shocks in the World Cup. I feel like the closest we've had is the Ivory Coast coming 3rd in the 2070 World Cup, which is handy as they're one of the nations we've loaded up for this database. And whilst their very best players are comparable to those coming out of Brazil, Brazil in general are producing more players with high potential abilities. And again, potentially that is because outside of the top clubs in the Ivory Coast, a lot of teams do not have very good facilities, whereas pretty much every club in Brazil's top division have great youth facilities. But I think if we go to season 100, that might finally show enough change in the database. Maybe in season 100, you'll click that subscribe button. We are so close to 150,000 subscribers now. And things certainly do look different. The top 10 players by potential ability are from Macedonia, Bosnia, Cambodia, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bolivia, Andorra, Croatia, Iceland, and Australia. So finally, 100 years in the future, we might have got to the point where the production centres of Wonderkids has actually changed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, as Andorra only have 6 players with over 150 potential ability, and my national team is only ranked 90th in the world. In theory, given their youth rating, they should be a lot closer to number 1. Worse still, they've never actually qualified for any World Cup or European Championships. On the other end of the scale, Brazil have 55 players with over 150 current ability, despite their youth rating now only being rated at 27 out of 200. The youth rating is dynamic, obviously, that's why it's changed, but obviously it doesn't change all that much over the course of 100 years, and certainly not enough for them to producing this many amazing Wonderkids. And it's the same for Cambodia. We maxed out their youth rating, and they only have 3 players over 150 potential ability. And then France have 40 players over 150 potential ability, despite their youth rating now being only 26 after dropping it to just 10. But Bolivia are ranked 6th in the world right now, and Ivory Coast are 11th. So on the world stage, some things have changed. But it does seem to be that the youth rating is not as important as you would think it is. The most out there winner of the European Championships is Bosnia in 2056, and Spain, who I gave a youth rating of 10, have reached 12 of the 25 finals over the last 100 years. Copa America is still mostly dominated by Brazil and Argentina, although Bolivia have won a couple of tournaments. Ivory Coast have dominated the Africa Cup of Nations, despite having one of the lowest youth ratings in all of Africa. And when it comes to the World Cup, the end of the 21st century was a good time to be an England fan. Norway were the only out there team to have won the tournament. And even looking at 2nd and 3rd place, the only team that really catches your eye is Bolivia and Ivory Coast. So in conclusion, it just seems like youth ratings are not as important as you would think in generating great young players. We just didn't see anywhere near the amount of change that I thought we should do. So now we've discovered that disappointing truth, it's time to cheer us up. Who do you think would be a better football manager? Messi or Ronaldo? Well, in this video on screen, I've tried to find that out. And the result is a lot closer than you might be expecting.